Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm John Macri, and I am once again joined by the great Nathan Jahnke, and we're here today to talk fantasy football sleepers for the 2024 season. Nate, we've got 2 full weeks of preseason action in the books now. Situations and rotations are starting to become clearer to us as far as, what we could potentially expect from these teams come week 1. So, there's always surprises and everything like that. But still, I know you've been diving deep into the data here for every preseason game. So how are you feeling about your grasp on the 2024 fantasy options so far?
Feeling good at this point. I'll see what happens in the third week of the preseason, but what's really hitting me yesterday of we're a week away from cut downs, which means it's time to start getting ready for week 1 rankings, week 1 content, really starting to shift the mindset to what's going to be happening in the very near future. But feel like we have a good handle. It's just a matter of how much we see ADPs change over this next week or so. Like Rashee Rice, everyone is high on him right now. So it's if everyone is high on him, is anyone high on him? But we see just a stark difference in this ADP and the best ball places that update very frequently versus some of these bigger sites where it's a little bit slower to react. So it'll be interesting to see how much ESPN and Yahoo and those places react to Rashee Rice over this next week and other players that are clearly trending up or down right now.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely going to be some movement here. And I think Rashee Rice is probably the best example. I feel like we talked about him. I can't remember, maybe last episode, or maybe I wrote about him as well in the wide receivers to target episode. But it's true, it doesn't seem like that suspension is, likely to affect him right now for this season, right? At least as the closer we get, the less likely it seems. So he's, definitely should be on the rise. But today we're talking sleepers, right? So we're digging even deeper into the ADP, which we're pulling from sleeper. We're going 10th round or later in those 12-team leagues. So anyone going behind beyond an ADP of 120, we're taking, I think, 4 players each. We've actually gone with only running backs and wide receivers for this one. No quarterbacks or tight ends. Not to say that they can't be sleepers, because we did this criteria last year. I think it was for an article. We had Sam Howell, Brock Purdy, Sam Laporta. They all fit that criteria for us last year. They worked out pretty nicely, so they can definitely work out. Nate, I know you wrote up quarterbacks and sleeper tight ends as well for the site. But today we're going to focus this episode on just the running backs and the wide receivers, because it's a deeper pool of players. And we want to try to find some, potential hidden gems at those positions. But before we do, I want to let everybody know that they can dominate your fantasy league this season with PFF. You can use code Fantasy25 to get 25% off PFF Plus annual subscription. Today is the last day, I believe, Nate, or was it?
I think yesterday was the last day.
Okay. Well, in that case, you can still head to pff.com and dominate your fantasy league by using our rankings and mock draft simulator, live draft assistant, in-season tools as well. We're going to be doing waiver wire targets, buy low, sell high advice, rest of season rankings, all that kind of stuff. So you can go to subscribe.pff.com. Unfortunately, the promo code is likely gone. So for those of you that missed out, you missed out on the 25% discount, but that doesn't mean that it's still worth it to get in there now, because you get a nice full load of content for the entire season. So Nate, let's start with our sleeper picks now, and we'll kick things off with the running back position. We got 4 running backs to cover. We'll start in Denver with one of your picks, Jaleel McLaughlin, who is being drafted as the 179th player off the board. What do you like about McLaughlin's sleeper potential this season?
Sure. So first, in general, the Denver running backs, it's always been kind of interesting because Sean Payton's there, and Sean Payton has such a long history of successful fantasy running backs with the Saints, even when they've been in committees. And especially in this case with McLaughlin, it's a lot of short running backs that Peyton has a history with. Mark Ingram, Pierre Thomas, Darren Sproles, all 5'9" or shorter. Some of the best running backs that have been that short over the past 15 years. So that's been kind of exciting in general, knowing that Denver doesn't have quite as much depth at wide receiver or running back, likely to have a rookie starting quarterback. So a high reliance on running backs. So this has always been an interesting competition to watch. And it looks like after the second preseason game, it's really starting to shape up. We saw with the starters, it was Javonte Williams and Jaleel kind of rotating every couple of plays, which was great to see. In the first preseason game, we saw Samaje Perine still taking third downs, taking the 2-minute drill. But in this second game, he was pretty clearly one of the two backup running backs rather than one of the two starters. So that's a pretty decent sign to me that Perine is in danger of getting cut by the team, which after that happens, those third down snaps are going to be available. And we saw in this last preseason game, McLaughlin not just take the only third and long snap, he also was taking some snaps at the goal line. So even though I'd expect him to be one of the last running backs to play in those situations because of his size, he was still there. So there's a chance he'll get some touchdowns in those kind of situations, but expect him to have a high target share. He had that last year whenever he was on the field, graded very well, a top 6 running back by PFF grade, albeit on the small sample size. So I think he's a talented player. He'll be in a rotation with Williams. Audric Estime hasn't really gotten any work with the starters, at least in the preseason. I haven't seen a ton of buzz on him since training camp has started. So this is really looking like a 2-man rotation to me. And the Saints running backs were consistently able to have fantasy starters in that kind of 2-man rotation. So excited to see what Jaleel can do as a big part of the offense.
Yeah, I'm honestly, I'm kind of feeling pretty good about both of these Denver running backs at this point, right? Like it was great, obviously, that McLaughlin started over Perine as the first back to kind of spell Javonte Williams, who he started that game. I know Javonte, he played a couple third and short situations, right? So they weren't like obvious passing downs, but even though they did end up passing on those plays. But yeah, I like McLaughlin. I think, just based on the preseason usage, obviously he absolutely makes sense as that second starter. But I know this is supposed to be about McLaughlin. I just kept finding myself, feeling more optimistic about Javonte Williams as well, right? Like for that RB1 role, like I think he obviously looks better than he did last year, which I think is fair to expect, considering he's another year removed from the knee injury. Had a nice pass pro block on one of those third downs in the second preseason game where he cut down the defensive end. But yeah, I know, they were talking about Javonte Williams as like a roster bubble player earlier in the offseason, along with Perine. I don't think I see that now. Like I'm with you. I think Perine is probably in more danger. And I think I like McLaughlin there to still have some viable fantasy value in, maybe it's deeper leagues or whatever. But I like both of these guys. I find myself kind of trying to take shots on both of them if I can get them, right? And I mean, the price on McLaughlin is not expensive, is a low risk player who's going to get some work in this offense. I like Estime as well, but I don't think, he's in any kind of position to take like relevant snaps for fantasy this year outside of an injury or something like that. So yeah, I really like this call. Anyways, I started to feel more optimistic about the whole Denver backfield than I did previously this offseason. So if it's going to be just Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin as the two starters, like I like that situation a little bit more.
Yeah, like you said, I've been doing sleepers this week. I've rewritten all of my sleeper league winners and breakout articles. And I was thinking about when I was doing the running backs, if I was okay having both Williams as a breakout and Jaleel here. And I ended up saying yes, having both players in those kind of articles of players that I'm buying, targeting both of them at their ADPs.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, next up, I also have a running back who I think has a chance to carve out a decent role this season. It's the rookie Dylan Laube of the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, I know like depth chart wise right now, like he's still behind Zamir White and Alexander Madison, but I'm not necessarily banking on him passing Zamir White right now, where I'm at least expecting him to pass Madison. Madison did play like the obvious passing downs in each of the first drives for the Raiders with the starters these past two preseason games. Didn't really do much with them, didn't pass block or anything like that. But I mean, Nate, you noted it in the preseason takeaways article from this past week, right? The Raiders kind of had this rotation of backs by drive, which to me kind of indicates that they might not be fully sold on like a Zamir White as a starter, which I'd imagine transfers to Alexander Madison and Amir Abdullah as well, who both got work on their own separate drives. And we're starting to see Laube move up the depth chart slowly here. But if we compare this to maybe the McLaughlin situation in Denver, it isn't necessarily as clear that Laube is the next man up behind the presumed starter. But at the same time, I feel like that his path to that role might be about the same, if not better, based on kind of the guys ahead of him. Even if he doesn't pass Zamir White as RB1, like leaping Madison or Abdullah shouldn't be nearly as difficult, especially considering, that they kind of look like the passing down options, which is something that Laube was quite good at based on his college profile. And, for his career in the FCS, he posted 3 straight seasons with at least an 81.1 receiving grade, including a 90.5 last year. Saw at least 60 targets in each of the past 2 years, delivered over 700 yards and 7 touchdowns last year as a receiver. His career 1.81 yards per route run coming out ranks among the 92nd percentile of running backs since 2018, or running back prospects since 2018. Now, again, I know it's the FCS, but that is at least still a little bit more encouraging receiving profile than what we'll find with Alexander Madison, for example. And then for Abdullah, he's 31 years old now, so well past kind of that running back age cliff. I just wouldn't be surprised. And I guess I'm actually kind of expecting Laube to take over that passing down work at some point soon this season. And if the Raiders continue to not feel like overly comfortable with a massive workload for Zamir White, then that role could translate to some early downs as well and help kind of increase that production floor. So I'm in on Laube right now for a player that is mostly going undrafted on Sleeper. I think his ADP was 269.5. So most leagues he's not being drafted. But how are you feeling about this Raiders backfield and Laube specifically?
I'm feeling pretty good about Laube presently. We both picked 4 players to talk about in this show, and I still included Dylan in my sleeper running back article anyway, even though he was one of your guys. So definitely high on him as well. I think rookie running backs that are mid to late round picks, I have no problem whatsoever with them being lower on the depth chart earlier in the season. We saw last year Devin Achane was 5th on the depth chart in the Dolphins' first preseason game. The year before, Tyler Algier, 5th on the depth chart behind a bunch of guys who aren't with the Falcons anymore, some of them not on rosters anymore. So it's fine if a running back has to work his way up. And we saw in the first preseason game, it was White, Madison, and Abdullah all playing in the first half. Laube didn't get his first snap until the third quarter, and he basically had the third quarter for himself. And then in the second game, that changed. Laube got to play in the second quarter at a time when the starters were still playing. So there were 2 or 3 drives in there where it was Zamir White as the early down back and Laube as the third down back. Even got a 1st and 10 snap in there. So that was really good to see him get an early down snap while Zamir White was still playing. Also got to take the 2-minute drill, which was big. So at least his first obstacle he has to go over is Amir Abdullah for the third down back, because Abdullah was the third down guy last year. Abdullah did get a snap on the third drive with Alexander Madison, but it was basically Laube throughout the second quarter being the receiving back, Abdullah having to play a bit in the third quarter. So it seems like he's already surpassed Abdullah for that role. It's just Madison that it's in his way now, but Madison, they've trusted him as an every down player in the preseason. So it's possible Madison doesn't get the third down role, but has to fight for snaps on the early downs. And I had noted on Twitter around the 8th drive for the Raiders and the third quarter of the game, it was White taking the first couple of plays, then Madison taking a couple of plays, then Laube taking a couple of plays at a time when it was the backup quarterback. None of the starting wide receivers were playing. None of the top 2 tight ends were playing. Only 2 starting offensive linemen. They were missing 2 linemen for the game, another 3 veterans already substituted out of the game. So if they trusted White, then White wouldn't have been playing in the third quarter because they have plenty of other healthy running backs. The big reason you see a veteran player playing that late when you think they're going to be the starter is because the team has injuries at the position, and the Raiders had multiple guys fighting for snaps in the fourth quarter. So injuries was not the issue here. So it's a combination of I trust a rookie running back who is moving his way up the depth chart, and we saw that movement from the first preseason week to the second one. and an unsettled backfield in general. So, like you said, excellent receiver in college. Expect him to have that receiving down role. Would not be at all surprised if that happens for week 1 of the regular season. But I think it's also possible that he gets in some kind of rotation of snaps on the early downs if he can beat out either Madison for some of those snaps or White for some of those snaps. Just has to play better than one of them. So we have a lot of other talented rookie running backs that it's going to be hard for them to work their way up because there's too much talent ahead of them. But in this case, I think we're going to see a fluid situation for a lot of these early parts of the seasons with the Raiders.
Yeah, I'm feeling optimistic for sure. And, I was watching kind of like the Raiders running back snaps from this preseason earlier this week. And one of the things I noticed too, like they've been lining up their running backs either wide or in the slot quite a bit as well, which is, not nearly as much as like a Washington or Miami has been doing, for example, but still something that maybe they want to try. They didn't really do it as high of a rate last year as the cut they're currently showing in this preseason. So, could be something there, especially for a guy, like you said, who has that kind of receiving profile like a Laube, where he is getting a little bit more work because he has that kind of versatility and can act as a receiver as well. So I just found that interesting, but yeah, definitely feeling pretty good about Laube here and his chances of cracking that starting roster. So Nate, you've gone with another smaller back here, showing some love to the little guys, another rookie running back for us as well. And one that I did and still like quite a bit, actually, coming out of this year's draft process, now of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You're ready to now refer to them as the Buccaneers because you have Bucky Irving as your other sleeper running back, Nate.
Yeah, I've had Irving in that spot basically since he got drafted. I think in the night that I wrote that he was drafted, had an article about winners and losers and how expected him to be in a good position, in large part because of Rachaad White's inefficiencies last year. We saw it. His low yards per carry, yeah, you can blame the offensive line for some of it, but even when you compare Irving on perfectly blocked runs compared to all the other running backs on perfectly blocked runs, and he was near the bottom of the league there. So I think even though White can still be a good receiving back for Tampa Bay, I could see Irving taking a lot of these early down snaps for them. The head coach, Todd Bowles, had a quote recently. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but basically talking about how he does such a good job of making the first guy miss and that he's exactly what they thought he'd be when they drafted him. And that's part of the offense that they were missing last year. So the fact that he included at the end of that quote that it was something that they know they didn't have last year makes me think that he's going to get those opportunities to do that this year. So I don't know how high of a percentage of the snaps he can end up taking from White, but I definitely had my 5 players to avoid in drafts article that came out today, and White was on that list because I don't know how many of those snaps White's going to lose. So I think out of the running backs in this class, a lot of them haven't worked their way too far up the depth chart. We haven't seen much in the preseason because the Buccaneers have consistently rested their starters, where Irving's been the starter for the preseason as the top backup. So he's played well, avoided tackles in the preseason so far too. So excited to see what he can do this year, and happy to get him, especially with how late his ADP is.
Yeah, he's like just beyond the top 200 on Sleeper right now. So, like you said, at the very least, I mean, he doesn't look like he has any competition for the RB2 role right now. Rachaad White, like you said, I know, he wasn't amazing last year as far as efficiency goes. So it's definitely concerning for him, especially like you said, with him catching strays from the head coach there. But it makes sense because Irving, he was that kind of elusive running back coming out. And like, I know he's small and he didn't have this amazing combine or anything like that, but like you look at his college profile at Oregon and it's pretty encouraging that he can handle a decent workload and translate to an NFL field. Like he's 96th percentile in career missed tackles forced per attempt among the running back prospects since 2018. Really strong rushing grade. Those in the 90th percentiles there for rushing grade. And then for a small back too, I think it was particularly encouraging, at least to me, that he ranked 91st percentile for his career rushing grade versus a stacked box as well, which again, that is something that you're going to see in the NFL and from bigger and stronger and more athletic players as well. So you need to have some kind of, shining light to to hope on there for a small player like Bucky Irving, and at least he has that potential in him, especially being as elusive as he is. And again, I like White to kind of improve this season, at least as far as his efficiency metric goes, but it doesn't mean that they can't let somebody else get work to give White a breather either. And Irving, very clearly that guy, like, especially if something were to happen to White as well, where he misses any time at all, like this is an even bigger boost for his fantasy value and somebody that basically you could get for free in drafts right now. So yeah, I like this. I like the Bucky Irving call quite a bit.
And a tidbit on White, you were talking about percentiles for running backs, and I have over 100 player profiles on the site, and included in them are bar charts of running backs and how they do in percentiles and yards per carry in various situations. I had to change the code for those after I did Rachaad White because the text didn't fit on the bars because the bars weren't big enough for the text to show up. So that is, if you need a picture of how White's graph looks in those situations, that's what I had to do for White.
That's sad. That is sad for Rachaad White, who, yeah, I like, but it's definitely getting concerning here. Okay.
Specifically as a rusher, he is a good receiving back. It's just his rushing that I'm concerned about.
Yeah, wasn't great. Like, again, he was a very volume dependent fantasy back last year, but there's definitely a chance that volume kind of goes down this year with a capable RB2 this season with Bucky Irving. So my other sleeper running back is, I guess, going the highest of all our other picks here, but still has an ADP on sleeper of 148.7. So like 13th roundish, usually around there. But I'm going with not a rookie running back this time, but a back where his greatest competition might just be a rookie running back. I went with Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. I feel like we talked about this last week a bit in the handcuff running back episode, so I'll try not repeating like a lot of the same things, but I think Hubbard is at least getting a bit overlooked in drafts right now, especially considering the status of Jonathan Brooks kind of being up in the air for week one. And I know that's part of it, right? We all expect Jonathan Brooks to take over as the team's lead back. He is being drafted higher than Chuba Hubbard because of that, but there's no guarantee that this happens right away or even by mid-season. It's not even like a guarantee that it happens this year, right? And that's kind of the thing that I keep coming back to with this situation and with Jonathan Brooks especially. Like, and maybe I'm overthinking this. You could tell me if I'm wrong here. But so he is the top Panthers running back being drafted at the moment. I think he's RB 28 by ADP, but he's also less than a year removed from a torn ACL, which has already this team has already said to come. That he won't be playing in the preseason, may not be ready for the start of the year as well. And he's also a player that only has 1 year of starting experience in college at Texas, while also coming off that ACL without much practice time with the team. Like, he's not going to be immediately thrown into action as the lead back, right? Like, that's going to take time. And in the meantime, Chuba Hubbard at least figures to be the primary beneficiary of that absence. We've already seen, Hubbard as the Panthers starting running back last season when Miles Sanders missed time and underwhelming performances from him. And as a result, Hubbard was a pretty good fantasy option in the back half of last season. He ranked as the PPR RB10 from weeks 12 to 17 when he was fully embraced as the lead back. And his 79.4 rushing grade ranked as the 17th best mark among all backs on the year. So I think he should serve as the lead back once again, even if it's like for the first half of the year before Brooks is fully healthy, which to me is still more valuable than like his current ADP would indicate, because we're probably going to be ranking him higher than this on a weekly basis while he's in that role, right? So I think there's definitely some value to kind of take advantage of here with Chuba Hubbard.
Yeah, I think like everything you said there is true. With Brooks, there's a chance he misses the first couple games of the season, since in 6 days from now, teams have to decide who's making their 53-man roster. And a way that the Panthers could potentially keep another guy on the roster for a couple weeks is putting Brooks on one of those injury lists that'll keep him out for the first couple weeks of the season. So I think that is definitely in play for Carolina, that Brooks isn't there the first few weeks of the season, and then from there have to like slowly but surely work him in. So part of it depends on your roster construction. Like if you've already drafted 2 highly drafted running backs that are going to be in your starting lineup without a problem those first couple weeks of the season, then perfectly fine not drafting Hubbard because he's not going to start for you early in the season, might not start for you late in the season. Maybe better to get a higher upside guy because I think we know what the like top end talent Hubbard is capable of at this point. So we know he's not going to be a top 5 running back, for example, even in that feature role, because he had that feature role last year and was not a top 5 running back. The probably biggest concern I have is the other running backs on the Panthers roster. The Panthers have a brand new coaching staff, completely different from last year. They still have Miles Sanders on the roster. They still have Raheem Blackshear on the roster. None of those running backs have been playing in the preseason. I know Carolina's been resting a few people. I don't know how much of these running backs, if they're injured or if the coaches just like them enough and are just like, hey, we already have one injured running back. We don't want more injured running backs. So not even playing any of them in the preseason, but I do not have a great sense of how this backfield rotation is going to shape up, if it's going to be the same as we saw at the end of last year, or if it's going to be a 50-50 split between Hubbard and Sanders. Maybe they even like Sanders a little bit better, and we just don't know it yet. There's a lot of things that could happen with Carolina's backfield. So based on his ADP, perfectly fine taking a chance on him if you especially are looking for a running back early in the season. If you're drafting some of these other running backs that we're talking about, going with the 0 running back strategy, you probably can't start Dylan Laube week 1 because he's probably not going to work his way up the depth chart that high until later in the season, or like Bucky Irving probably will earn more time as the season goes on. So if you need a running back week 1 in particular, then I think he's a great option. But I think it really depends on how the makeup of your team is up until the point where you would consider drafting him.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. And yeah, I guess, I'm definitely counting out Miles Sanders by hoping for Chuba Hubbard. But like you said, it's not impossible that the team just likes him more. Miles Sanders does have a decent NFL track record. I know it wasn't great last year either, but like you said, new coaching staff coming, and we'll see how they kind of treat these guys. Dave Canales, was with Tampa Bay last year, where they did rely really heavily on Rachaad White, who we just talked about, right? So there's hope at least that it'll be less of a rotation until Brooks comes back. But again, we won't know until these guys maybe even get preseason snaps or until week 1. So hopefully, again, doesn't cost much in drafts, so potentially low risk. But yeah, like you said, if you need a sleeper right away, then Chuba Hubbard maybe could have some value there. So quick ad break. Hey everyone, we're just going to take a quick break to let you know that this episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. In today's hectic world, it's easy to focus on everything except yourself and your own mental health. Sometimes you need a little help to help make sure that stays on track as well. Therapy can be really useful to get a better understanding of how your mind actually works and to become more aware of your own patterns of behavior and how to improve them. It's useful for everybody, not just people struggling with something specific. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is a convenient, flexible, and entirely online way to get therapy that's right for you. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you could switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/PFFfantasy today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/PFFfantasy. Okay, we got wide receiver time now, another 4 players, 2 each. And your first pick, Nate, being drafted at 166.7, according to his ADP on Sleeper. Dallas Cowboys wide receiver Brandin Cooks. What do you like about Cooks as one of your sleeper picks?
Yeah, Cooks, I'm very surprised that he hasn't gone up in ADP over these past 2 months. I first wrote my sleeper articles beginning of July, made a ton of sense to me there, and I don't think much has really changed since then. He had a slow start to his time with the Dallas Cowboys. Several years before that, he's been a fantasy starter, multiple locations, varying levels of quarterback play. He's played with some of the all-time great quarterbacks, but has also been a fantasy starter with some not great quarterbacks, and Dak Prescott's better than a ton of other quarterbacks in the league. But a slow start, not exactly sure why he had a slow start, but then broke out middle of the season, 9 catches, 173-yard performance. Basically, from that point on, he was a pretty decent fantasy starter, was consistently playing at least 70% of offensive snaps the rest of the season. And from week 10 on, which is basically half of the season, he was wide receiver 14 over that stretch. And CeeDee Lamb was wide receiver 1. So it's pretty clear the two can coexist in Dallas, with both of them being fantasy starters. We have plenty of examples of two wide receivers being clear fantasy starters in recent seasons. The Dolphins, the Bengals being two examples there. And like right now, CeeDee Lamb's holding out. So who's been the number one wide receiver all training camp for Dallas? It's been Cooks. And like we saw basically all of the other wide receivers playing in the preseason with the backups this past week when they rested their starters. So it's pretty clear Cooks is still ahead of all of the other wide receivers they have on the depth chart. They let go of Michael Gallup this year, and their only new player was a 6th-round pick who hasn't really worked his way up the rotation. So if anything, he has less competition for targets at wide receiver. They're going from Tony Pollard to Ezekiel Elliott at running back. So if anything, less competition for both targets on passing plays from the backfield, but also they might just not run the ball as much this year as they were rushing last year with Pollard. So that means more passing attempts for everyone. So all Cooks has to do is do the same thing he did the second half of last year. And he's a top 15 fantasy wide receiver getting drafted this late in drafts. And if anything, the situation has gotten better for Cooks rather than worse. Obviously, downside, he's one of the older wide receivers in the league. You expect players at that age to be taking a step back at some point in time. But so far, we have not seen that out of Cooks, outside of like he was at his peak multiple years ago, but he's been playing at a pretty consistent level these past few years.
Yeah, I love this pick. Like you said, the situation potentially even better for him this year than last year. You got CeeDee Lamb out here posting pictures of the symbiote Spider-Man suit from Spider-Man 3 on his Instagram. Not sure what's going on there, but yeah, like there's a potential holdout into the season. I don't know about that, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, like this is CeeDee Lamb's team, right? As far as receiving goes, I really like Jake Ferguson as well to potentially be the second option in the passing game. But like you said, they showed a reliance on Brandin Cooks last year in the second half of the season. Like he was a clear part of their offense, and it's an offense that will still probably expect to be pretty good for 2024, assuming Dak and CeeDee are good to go, right? And I mean, even if you just look at their numbers from last year, as far as, what to expect from this offense, they were 13th in the league in pass rate, 6th in passing yards per attempt, tied for 1st in amount of first downs gained receiving, 2nd in passing touchdown percentage, 3rd in passing yards, 1st in passing completions. Like, yeah, a lot of that was CeeDee Lamb, but not all of it is kind of the point, right? Where if we're targeting some of these, tertiary receiving options, I at least want to make sure they're coming from a good offense. And Cooks, we know, is in a good offense. So yeah, I really like this pick here. It's a nice value for sure. Okay, I've taken, I guess, a somewhat similar approach with my wide receiver sleeper pick, actually being drafted pretty close to Cooks as well. They're both going to be, I guess, 30 years old during the season this year. They're both former first-round picks as well, both the likely wide receiver 2 in their respective offenses. So for me, my pick is Mike Williams now of the New York Jets, going at 149.9 on sleeper. And I know Mike Williams, the concern with him is always going to be health, right? He's been in and out of games with injuries, and most recently he only played 3 games in 2023 before his season was over due to an ACL. I know he's currently on the PUP list as well, but the Jets do expect him to be ready for week 1, which, if true, his current cost is essentially free as far as production goes, and basically carries little to no risk, I would think. And it does sound like he'll be joining team drills next week. You got Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. The Jets should be a much more effective offense in 2024, especially if Williams, can consistently serve as the team's wide receiver too. He's going to have to bounce back from the ACL injury. He is on the older side. We don't know exactly what he's going to look like on the field, but this is a guy that, he hasn't averaged double-digit points per game, or hasn't not average double-digit points per game since his rookie season. He has the big play upside, which again, we'll have to see how much of that, continues with the ACL, but he's proven to be a strong vertical threat that gives him the ability to kind of post those week winning performances at any moment. And for that upside alone, I'm again, the cost is next to nothing. If he can get to 13 games again, like he has in the last 5 straight seasons heading into last year, then there's at least some juice left to squeeze out of his potential value here is kind of how I'm looking at Mike Williams right now.
Oh, yeah. Like last year, averaged 16.7 fantasy points per game. Yeah, that was just a 3-game sample size. But if you ignore the sample size, that's top 10 for wide receivers, just ranking how good points per game is at 16.7. So he's been fairly good as a fantasy starter in previous years as well. I think offers something that the Jets don't have. Like, I know Garrett Wilson, obviously awesome wide receiver, will be the wide receiver 1 on the team, but I think Mike Williams at his spot will do great. They don't have much competition for targets outside of those 2 players, outside of Breece Hall, of course, at running back, but they haven't really made many other changes to the wide receiver depth chart. I added Corley to be their slot receiver in whatever plays they want to have him in for, but so far he's only been playing in 11 personnel on the slot. So Williams very much an outside receiver. Don't think that impacts him very much. Tyler Conklin at tight end, we've seen what he can do every year. He is a good enough player to be a starting tight end in the NFL, but not much more than that, especially in terms of when you're competing for targets. So a lot we're riding both on Williams' health as well as Rodgers, what he's still capable of doing after missing a year. But when we're at this point of fantasy drafts, I'm looking for someone who has a chance to put up top 20 fantasy production most of the time, rather than just a guy who we know can be almost close to a fantasy starter. I want someone who has a chance. That might not be a high chance, but they can put up top 20 numbers, and we've seen that out of Williams before. It's just a matter of his health and Aaron Rodgers' health. So he needs 2 things to go right, but if they both go right, then you are very happy with the production, where plenty of other wide receivers, it's like, what, even if things do go right, how high can they produce for fantasy production? And it might not be as high as what Williams has proven that he can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I like about his cost, right? Like all that kind of, the concerns and the risk is already baked into his cost, but the upside necessarily isn't, right? Where, you're not going to find these kind of guys in the later portions of the round that have proven production like that and are likely to be the second option on the depth chart, unlike, not unlike a Brandin Cooks going in the same range. So there's 2 guys right there, but for the rest of the group going in that round, in those rounds, I think Mike Williams stands out along with Brandin Cooks as some kind of obvious targets there too, that are worth the price tag. Okay, Nate, we've got one more rookie on our sleeper list here. As much as people have been kind of afraid of New England wide receivers in recent years, not you, sir. You are buying the potential of 2nd-round rookie wide receiver Jaleel Polk in year 1. Help sell him to the good folks here, because I like Jaleel Polk as well.
Sure. So he's someone that was talented in college. We thought this was a really good wide receiver draft class, and it's hard to kind of, there's wide receivers who are getting lost in the shuffle because we get so excited about the top couple wide receivers in this class that I feel like some of these other wide receivers got lost. And I think Polk has the opportunity to be the clear top wide receiver in New England this year. In the preseason, he has been playing both the Z wide receiver position, playing behind KJ Osborne so far, as well as in the slot with the second team a lot when they've been in 11 personnel, which is a little worrying because that's Demario Douglas's position. But it's been weird looking at the Patriots snaps throughout the preseason, because we know that the future at quarterback is their early 1st-round pick, and he has not been playing with the starters, and it's been a lot of the veteran guys playing with the first team, a lot of the younger guys playing with the second team. So it hasn't felt exactly like first team and second team, because we know what the future is of this offense. Doug Keed, our former coworker, has been reporting in training camp this week that Polk's been playing with these starters. It seems like he has earned that starting Z receiver job over KJ Osborne, so that is obviously great. And I did the wide receiver utilization study early this offseason, talking about how players who play more in the slot in 11 personnel while also playing on the outside in 12 or 21 personnel typically put up better numbers than those who are just playing on the outside every down. So the fact that Polk has been learning both positions when there's so many rookie wide receivers who either only play on the outside or only play in the slot The fact that he's been learning everything has been great. We know they probably won't throw to their X receiver that often. It's probably going to be Tyquan Thornton, assuming they don't make any trades. So it really seems like it's going to be Polk and Douglas taking the majority of these targets. Douglas might not have as many snaps as some of the other wide receivers, but I still think he'll see a pretty high target share when he is on the field. Another team with just a veteran tight end or veteran tight end room. They have multiple veteran tight ends at this point. So we know they're not going to get a ton of targets compared to other tight end rooms. So I think the opportunity is there for Polk to see a ton of targets in this offense. We expect this team to be passing the ball a lot in a lot of games because they're probably going to be playing from behind a decent amount this year. So that's going to be just an opportunity to rack up a ton of volume. So excited about what his potential is. In week one, I think he should be the top target earner for the Patriots offense.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, yeah, the preseason usage it's been weird. I guess like it hasn't given us that clear indication that we're looking for. I mean, I know they had like Juju Smith-Schuster, I think, was playing on the first drive in that first preseason game, and then he was like cut like what felt like the very next day or something like that. So, but these are I do like these kind of ambiguous situations sometimes where I am kind of betting on the cream to rise to the top, and for Jalen Polk, second round wide receiver and a decent college profile coming out, he, like you said, he is as good a shot as anyone within this wide receiver core to emerge as that top target earner, especially now that it seems like a Brandin Ayuk deal is dead there. But we kind of see this every offseason, right? Where these are the kind of situations where we can find a lot of value in, where we have these teams with new looks where we don't know exactly what to expect. We have kind of a wide range of outcomes where we could potentially squeeze a lot of fantasy value out of. Like you think about the Texans last year. CJ Stroud wasn't being drafted highly in fantasy last offseason, despite being the second overall pick. And we got really decent fantasy value out of Tank Dell and Nico Collins. And, Collins was a third year wide receiver, so more experience there. But Tank Dell was a rookie, and he was awesome in that lineup, right? He was a sleeper for us at some point last year. I remember talking with Kate about him. But even thinking about the Panthers last year, like Adam Thielen was amazing, right? Finished as like wide receiver 17 through the fantasy season with Bryce Young amongst like a hodgepodge of kind of wide receivers that we had over there. Jaden Reed in Green Bay to a lesser extent with Jordan Love, who we didn't know what to expect there. So there's plenty of examples just from kind of last season where these situations work out and they're better than we think. So if we're looking at New England with Drake May at quarterback, this could absolutely be one of those situations like last year. And yeah, maybe it's DeMario Douglas, maybe it's Kendrick Bourne, but like you said, the situation is looking better for Jalen Polk in practice, getting work with the starters, working in 12 and 11 personnel is huge. So I think there's a very valuable, I think he's a very valuable player in drafts right now that I would definitely be looking to target late.
Yeah, and like you said, with the preseason, they've been weird about like who's starting, who's the backup, that kind of stuff. But they have been very strict of we're going to have one X receiver on the field, we're going to have one Z receiver on the field, and if it's 11 personnel, one slot. So it's always either Tyquan Thornton or Jalen Reagor in the X spot. They haven't had both of those wide receivers on the field at the same time. It was always KJ Osborne or Polk at the Z spot with the starter. It wasn't both of them at the same time. Douglas has only played in 11 personnel. The week before, Juju Smith-Schuster was only playing in 11 personnel with Douglas out. So it's been a pretty strict tiers how we're going to use these wide receivers. And Polk has been the only one that has played two different spots, both the Z on the outside as well as in the slot and 11 personnel with the backups.
Yeah, it was pretty encouraging for sure. So yeah, excited about him. All right, last name of the day. I'm feeling also pretty good about the value at this point. Someone who kind of like Jalen Polk, I think has a pretty decent shot to emerge as wide receiver one on this offense. I'm going with Josh Palmer of the Los Angeles Chargers, being drafted in the 150 range in ADP. So what I love about Palmer is that to me, like at least he's consistently found a way to make himself more valuable for fantasy than like his preseason ADP would indicate. And I don't think this season is going to be much of an exception. Like he's just barely cracked the top 60 wide receivers being drafted for the first time in his career, despite finishing outside that range in points per game only in his rookie year. But even in that rookie season, once he became a regular part of the offense, he was able to deliver 10.9 PPR points per game across the final 5 games of that season. Since then, he's posted no worse than 10.6 PPR points per game in a season. And that's often being helped by either Keenan Allen or Mike Williams kind of missing time. But both of those guys are no longer on the team. Neither is Gerald Everett, neither is Austin Eckler, right? So these are all target earners that he'd have to contend with. He's currently being drafted 4 rounds after Ladd McConkey, his teammate there, and a rookie. And I love McConkey. I think there's plenty of reason to be excited about him. But again, it's a situation where it's not a guarantee that McConkey is the leader for the Chargers in receiving production this year over someone like Josh Palmer, who has an established connection with Justin Herbert. When Williams went down, Mike Williams, that is, when he went down in week 3 last year, Palmer posted 2.01 yards per route run from week 4 on, which ranked 27th among wide receivers. In that span, he also posted 12.4 PPR points per game across 7 appearances, which ranked as the PPR wide receiver 35 over that span, and a chunk of which was played without Justin Herbert at quarterback. So Herbert did have a bit of an injury to deal with here in recent weeks, but he looks good to go now. So I like the potential for Palmer. I don't know how high of a ceiling he has necessarily with this offense, likely to be run heavy and, potentially the ball being spread around a little bit more with guys like Ladd McConkey also capable of earning targets. But I still like him way more than I think his current ADP is willing to show. So I like McConkey as well. I do have McConkey slightly higher in the ranks, but my point here, I guess, is that I wouldn't be surprised at all if Palmer ends up leading this team in receiving production in 2024.
Fair. I agree. I think Palmer has a very decent chance of being the number one player in this Chargers offense in terms of receiving yards, receptions, and so on. Preseason usage, he played in the second preseason game, played most of the first drive, and then didn't play after that point. So the fact that he was the only wide receiver to only play one drive where everyone else had to play beyond that made things pretty clear that he's the top outside receiver for the team. It was Rice that was rotating in with the other DJ Chark, Quentin Johnston. I would not be surprised if it's some combination of all 3 of those guys playing like 33% of the snaps at the other wide receiver spot. So that other spot's going to be a mess all season. So perfectly happy having Palmer ahead of all of those guys. And then McConkey, it was him playing only in the slot in 11 personnel for his 2 drives. It was very consistent. He played 100% of those snaps, 0% on the outside in the 2 wide receiver sets. And there was a good 4 or 5 different wide receivers all taking snaps on the outside and 2 wide receiver sets on those 2 drives. So it seems pretty clear that Ladd is only going to be playing in 11 personnel this season on a team that's probably going to use a lot of 2 tight end sets because they just paid a ton of money for Will Dissly, who is one of the best run blocking tight ends in the league. So, like, on one hand, every team's number 1 wide receiver definitely has some value in fantasy. I am also just terrified of this offense for wide receivers. I was just writing about Hayden Hurst as a potential sleeper tight end because if you look at Greg Roman's offenses year after year with the 49ers, he was like average at throwing to tight ends, the fewest targets to wide receivers. He had 2 years in Buffalo, better at throwing to tight ends than wide receivers. His time in Baltimore, top 3 in throwing to tight ends, bottom 1 or 2 to wide receivers. I don't remember if it was running backs or wide receivers that Baltimore's been bottom in, but whichever one was the bottom, the other was second to the bottom.
Right.
So the fact that they throw so little to wide receivers has me worried. And like the reason I think it's okay for Ladd to have the higher ADP is we just don't know how high his upside is going to be. Even though he might only be playing in 11 personnel, he could be this awesome NFL wide receiver right away. We just don't know, where we have seen a couple years out of Palmer. Ideally, Palmer improves as a player. There's definitely time in his career for him to have a breakout at this time in his career. I just think it's a little more likely McConkey breaks out, but there's also all the utilization I look at, and Josh Palmer is going to be running more routes. I think that's definitely going to happen this year. Palmer should probably see more targets unless McConkey just earns a whole lot more than Palmer does. But at least early in the season, if I was had to make a start-sit decision, it would be Palmer that I'd be starting, even if I think McConkey has the higher upside potential.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Like, I'm fine having McConkey ranked ahead of Palmer, but just at the very least, I guess the two should probably be closer together is kind of how I'm looking at it, right? The 4-round gap between the two is kind of what stood out to me. And I think that's where we can make up some value there by targeting Josh Palmer in those later rounds. And like you said, if McConkey's only playing in 11 personnel, then that does open things up a little bit more for Josh Palmer to team in productions. I like it. That is our sleepers for this episode. Thank you all very much for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're on the YouTube. And while we only covered 8 sleepers on this episode, we got plenty more on pff.com. Nate, you've written them up by position. I'll do like my full list. I think next week I have it scheduled for. But Nate, speaking of pff.com, what else do you have going on for us this week at the site?
I know Monday through Friday, it's 5 a days or at least 5 a days per article. I think it's actually 7 a day now that I think of it, because I'm doing the sleeper breakouts on league winners as 3 separate articles for each position. I am also doing the perfect draft strategy. For the first time, I am doing them by individual pick number. I've either done them for just 12-team leagues in general, or ranges of picks, either picks 1 through 3, 4 through 6, those kind of things. This week I am having, here's the perfect draft strategy for pick 1, for pick 2, for pick 3 as all separate articles. So that's been going up throughout this week. Along with that, the 5 players to avoid. I know on social media I've talked about a decent number of these players, but I wanted to just have a full record of why I am down on some of the players that have at least a round later than what their ADP currently is, and a lot of cases even more than that. So definitely check that out. The recaps of the preseason, those will continue to go on. We got preseason games Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They were nice to us and spread out the games a little bit more than what they did this past week, where we had those 13 games on a Saturday with like 8 of them being night games. So luckily they will be spread out, and I get to focus a bit more attention on each individual run, rather than having to cram through all of them on a Saturday night. So we'll have preseason recaps throughout the weekend. And then next week, I will start republishing basically every article that I've done this year to get them updated, so you are fully ready for your fantasy drafts this year.
Nice. Can't wait for that. And yeah, as for me, I've written up some draft strategy articles, looking at a full offense plus IDP draft rankings and strategy piece. I've got another draft strategy article covering both an early running back heavy build and an early wide receiver heavy build. Those will be 2 separate articles. I think they'll both be out by tomorrow or Friday. And as well as like a later QB draft strategy article for Superflex. We'll also have the IDP preseason week 2 takeaways, or week 3 takeaways, I guess, in article form. We've done video versions of that, Nate. We recorded preseason takeaways for the offense side and for the IDP side, so as YouTube exclusive, so people can check those out as well and expect those for preseason week 3 also. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So until next time, peace out.